So we're now going to move on to our carer panel. So I'd like to invite our carers to come up onto the stage and take their seats. So we've got a great diversity of carers here today with us that are going to share their experiences in how the lived experience of caring can facilitate change in carer policy and practice. Now, as an organisation, Carers New South Wales often gets asked for carers to help inform a range of different things, whether it's, on a particular issue in the media, whether it's to sit on a particular committee, whether it's to participate in a radio interview or something else. It's around, carers being there and that voice and that lived experience helping to inform information, responses and service responses, but importantly, policy development and policy change. And I think even things like what Robert Fitzgerald was just talking about with us today, the development of the Commission has come out of a range of lived experience and understanding. So this is part of that avenue and response. So I'm just going to go through and say the names, and I'm going to get the carers to introduce themselves. But on our right at the beginning, we have Catalina Cortez, then we have Chris Doherty, then we have Farrah Vayani, then we have Sissy Hugh, who's come in very lovely today at the last minute to fill in for Katie Gray, which is fantastic. And then we have Georgie Burke, and then we have Dianne Brookes. So I'm going to get each of the carers just to very briefly introduce themselves and just very briefly their caring experience, and then we're going to move into some questions around policy development and how we inform policy, and then take some questions from the floor. Okay, so Catalina, are you okay to start off and just... Yep.
Hi. My name is Catalina. Full-time carer. I do care for a son who now turns 30. I became a carer after my son was diagnosed with PTSD, complex PTSD, after an action of crime in his late childhood. Professionally, I have vast experience working with the community. Firstly, as an interpreter with the government panel, and specifically with the Department of Health. That was on for more than 30 years. And later, before I stopped working altogether to become a full-time carer, I was working as a case worker, as an assistant manager in a women's refuge. So this is me.
Thank you, Catalina. Chris?
I have a 12 and a 17-year-old daughter who's currently doing a HSC. And she did her first exam today. Quite early we thought there was something a bit different about Alex. And I remember one day I watched a show on the ABC and I'd watched no more than about 30 seconds of it and had this little boy with autism. And I didn't even really think too much about that. And then I went to bed that night and I sat bolt upright because I suddenly realised that all these little mannerisms that this boy on this show had, Alex had. And Alex was only about a year old at the stage. My wife and I, we just hit fourth gear straight away. We got involved in early intervention, speech, OT, psychology. And we didn't actually ever really come to the realisation that we were all carers. I became involved in a large support group called Autism Parents Australia. It's got 14,000 members and I was an administrator on it. And I think that was about the time I became aware I was a carer, and it was about the time I became aware that I really needed to do something for the community, because what was really clear was there was a really poor level of health amongst carers. So many of them had mental illness themselves. So many of them had physical illness, and so many of them had financial poor health. I know in the carers community there's 2 times the unemployment of the mainstream Australians. And I think that's about when I sort of like my life started to change a bit, and I wanted to make a difference to other people, and that's about it.
Thanks, Chris. Farrah?
Hi. I care for my son, who's 15 years old now. He's got autism as well. Seems to be quite common these days. It's, I think, an epidemic, the way it's growing. I've been caring for him since he was diagnosed when he was about 2 years old. I used to work full-time for quite some years, but when he started high school, I realized I need to prioritize myself, and I stopped working, and I still wanted to give back to the community, which is why I became a Carers New South Wales representative, in order to feel valued and to make a difference. And so that's part of the reason why I'm here, trying to be their voice and advocate for them. Thank you.
Sissy? Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Cece. So right now I'm a student in my 3rd year at university studying commerce and information systems. So my carer journey started when I was actually quite young, when I was 8. My dad had stroke, which left half of his body disabled. So from that on, I actually didn't know I was a young carer either. And it was not until a school teacher actually referred me on to Carers New South Wales and Young Carers that then I realised. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Thanks, Sissy. Georgie?
Hi, I have a gorgeous 14-year-old daughter who has lots of medical conditions, and she was actually only just diagnosed a couple of weeks ago. So we have quite a intense sort of experience, 14 years of every specialist you can imagine, lots and lots of health services as well as the NDIS, constantly liaising with schools and, juggling lots of different, providers and advocacy. It's very unpredictable with my daughter. Even though we have a diagnosis now, it's still quite unpredictable what's ahead, what's happening next week. Because of her complexity, when the NDIS came in, it kind of presented another entire job for me. So that, on average, would take up about 2 to 3 days of the week for me, just managing her NDIS plan, the bureaucracy behind it. I had a fairly stimulating career, which kind of went down the gurgler. I've tried to sort of keep back in the workforce. I've juggled different ideas. I've done contract work from home. I had a job in the office last year in support coordination, and I had to leave that role because it was, the new NDIS space where, organisations are still trying to juggle how to make money out of these roles and the complexity behind that. So it was actually quite a huge workload, so I actually had to resign. And now I do disability support work, which is perfect for me because I have all the insight. I can call the shots about when I want to work and be there for my daughter when I can.
Thanks, Georgie. Dianne?
My name is Dianne Brookes. I'm a Yorta Yorta woman, and I am really quite proactive in the Aboriginal community. I didn't know I was a carer until when I was 9 years old. My mother was formally diagnosed with living with schizophrenia, and I still remember at 10 years old doing the grocery shopping and catching the train to Penrith to pay the rent for Mum in my role, and doing the washing too, which is another good thing. But I also have a brother who's from the deaf community, and I was his primary carer from that age, because when Mum wasn't in the home, I had to do that role. And then I was given the gift of my first child, and my first child was born with autism, and she was non-verbal up until about the age of 8. then quite intense therapies took us on a journey. And so I had this wonderful ability to then start asking questions, and it was then that I realised I was a carer.
So you can see the depth of experience. I feel a bit of a fraud standing up here with everybody. But we're going to explore and just have a look at a bit of questions, because all of these guys have worked and have informed and have helped shape different policies and practice through the different aspects of their involvement within the community, whether that's been in the formal space or in an informal space. So the first question I'm going to ask, which I'm going to ask of Dianne, I think, is what opportunities have you had in driving change in a policy or practice setting?
So it was driving change in policies and practices that actually inspired me from a very, very young age. In 2002, because I was really quite proactive in my mum's care in the mental health space, I was invited to be a professional visitor at Piala in Penrith. And then I was part of the Sydney Western Area Health Service Mental Health Carers Advocate Program as an ATSEC rep. And it was there that we were actually the first change that happened. So in Piala, and still stands today, that no one is released unless they first communicate with someone before they go home. So it's a really good practice that was set up, and it was set up because of that carer advocacy group. And we were really proactive, and often Penrith City Council used to clap when I walked into a room because I brought so many hats with me. And it was from that I was then invited to sit on the gathering. So the gathering was a group of Aboriginal people that come from all over New South Wales, and NCOS was the secretariat. And we wrote several policies and procedures on the best practice in Aboriginal communities. And it brought around so many changes. We were invited to Canberra because it was then that Aboriginal transport become a pivotal part of supporting Aboriginal people living with disabilities in rural and remote communities. So they're just two of some of the key things that I've used my voice to ensure that Aboriginal people and carers were being heard in the formation of words that can inspire other people.
Fantastic. Chris, would you like to try that one? Opportunities you've had in driving change in a policy or practice setting.
I'm so much in awe of you. And I feel like an absolute fraud now. I've been involved in a lot of things.
Chris.
A lot of them I tend to fall into.
Yep, just put the mic up a bit closer just so the people at the back can hear.
Hello.
Your wise
Oh,
words.
right. Yeah. A few things I've fallen into. I'm involved in my my employer's disability and carers network, and when I first became involved, it was called the Disability Network. So I actually drew their attention to the fact that carers were also in need of support within the organisation. So I'm quite proud of that.
Fantastic.
Part of it. I'm also involved in the Cumberland Access and Inclusion Committee, which helps to decide the disability strategy within the Cumberland Council area. Of course, I'm involved in Carers New South Wales. I'm also on the New South Wales Carer Strategy Committee as well, and I really enjoy that particular role. I like to think that I have some input. The other thing that I do a lot of is Facebook groups, and I run a few Facebook groups, one for dads of kids with autism, another one for, even though my son's still not quite a young adult, he's getting there, so I run another group for parents of kids who are older kids and adults. And also my own passion is employment for people with autism, so I run a group on that as well. At a time I was involved also in administering Autism Parents Australia, and that's got 14,000 members now. And that was where it really highlighted the level of disadvantage that a lot of carers had, and where we've really got to try and improve their lives a lot, many of them. I think mental health is disastrous amongst the caring community, but also poverty. You know, people would post pictures of their house, and the houses would be, you know, many of us wouldn't want to live there. And that's what really worries me a lot, and probably drove me to become more involved in the carers space. Yeah, that's about my level of...
That's excellent. And Georgie, did you want to comment on that, on what opportunities you've had in driving change in a policy or practice setting?
Yeah, I've just had a little bit because I've just come on board as a carers rep. So I spoke at Wollongong Uni recently to the social work students who were doing a unit called Service Users and Carers. And I think the goal of the course is for the students to gain a understanding of the complexities of the carer role. So I was probably a very good candidate to communicate that to them. I think I actually went into quite a lot of detail over 45 minutes about what the last 14 years have been like, and I've spent a lot of time talking about particularly health service providers, allied health and specialists, and the way doctors communicate with you and how confronting that can be as a carer, and building up my confidence to advocate for my daughter and for myself. So I think they got quite a lot out of that, particularly the narrow group, which was a much more intimate group. And another goal of that unit was to learn how to communicate more appropriately with carers. So again, particularly the narrow group, we were able to engage much better with each other about that, and we actually kind of talked through questions like, you know, how do you actually have conversations with a carer about really difficult topics, and I think that was quite valuable for them. I got really positive feedback from them, because, you know, and again, being first year, they were quite nervous, and yeah, I kind of threw a lot of stuff at them. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's, I mean, we've got a breadth of experience there in, you know, influencing local council, influencing through, you know, government and the things that Dianne talked about, but also then, you know, through that sort of student space and informing those, you know, health workers and allied health professionals of the future to, I suppose, you know, inform their practice in the future around carers, which is also great. So maybe just Farrah, maybe you'd like to tell us why you think it's important to have carers involved in such opportunities.
So I think it's really important to have carers involved in this opportunity because we have lived experience of what it's like to be in that space 24/7, and quite often we are the person we care for, their only voice. We all they have, so they count on us to do what they can't do for themselves, to advocate for them, to stand up for them, their rights, to fight for them. And if we don't do that, then we're letting them down. So I feel it's really important to take a stand for them, to improve the conditions they live in. There's so many challenges they face that the more we do for them, I mean, there isn't enough that we can do. There's so much that needs to change and improve. There are new challenges that they come across through different stages of life that they go through. And because we're in that boat with them 24/7, we have the experience, we have the knowledge, we have the perspective which we can offer, which no one else can unless they've been in those shoes. So we can empathize for them, we can stand up for them, we can fight for them. We are the only ones who can make those changes happen. And if we don't do that, then we're letting them down. So I feel it's really important to contribute to, because carers know best. And like I said, we're their only advocates, we're their voice. And so quite often, if we don't do what we need to do for them, we would really be letting them down in a big way, and I can't do that for my son. So in doing what I need to do for him, if I can do that for the broader community and be involved in, let's say, co-design workshops, thanks to Carers New South Wales, and to implement and make those changes happen, then I think it's a priority that's very important in my life, and that's something I'm very passionate about. So yeah, I think carers know best, and we in those shoes, we live and breathe that experience day by day. So we in the best position to stand up for them and to fight for them. Thank you.
Thanks. And Sissy, did you want to comment on that, like why it's important to have carers involved in different opportunities around driving policy and practice and change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, especially as a young person, I feel like I'm quite lucky in that I still have my mum who's the primary carer. So I still can, I guess, go about my life and not have to balance too many things. But I think for the young carers that I've met throughout this journey, I see that a lot of them actually have a lot of pressures placed on them, especially when they're kind of transitioning either between education and work. And I think there's been a lot of attention and advocacy around work-life balance and kind of making those needs known to your employers. But I think a gap in that I see is that kind of awareness for carers and making that known to, I think, employers, because sometimes I find imaginally, especially for me, when I go to an employer and they ask me to tell them about myself, I find I struggle between kind of wanting to tell them about my caring role and also not, because I feel like if I do, then they'll be like, oh, you know, what if she takes more days off? Can we really have that? And I feel like for me, it's not as big of an issue because I know I still have the rest of my family to support me, but I can imagine for the people around me, it's something that they probably battle with. And I think as a young person, especially if you start off with so many difficulties and so many challenges stacked against you, if you don't have the right support, I think it's quite devastating. So I think having people's input in policy, especially about young people, because I know there is a gap in the space, I think it's very important.
Fantastic. Catalina, did you want to comment on that from I suppose, involvement in the culturally and linguistically diverse space and some of the activities you've been involved in?
Certainly. Being a carer in the mental health area brings many challenges, as we know, in every manner. So adding to that, the language problem, obviously, it multiplies many times forward. At the moment, there isn't a lot of awareness for the communities in the languages that, different languages that we have here. And it's a must to be able to create ways of communicating the services that they can approach when they have the need or they are taking care of someone who is suffering some problem with mental health. I presume that programs such as using the media like SBS radio, which normally people are at home probably, where they can listen in their own languages and be aware of what they can have. Mental health problems in the CAL community, it could have a different understanding. And that's why it is important to teach them of the services that can be provided to them, and that being mentally ill is an illness, not a curse, as many community believe so. So that's could be what I can support. But one thing before I go is the fact that it is very important for services to use the professional interpreters in this, not the friends and not the family, because obviously they will not have any professionalism in the way when they are dealing with private issues of health.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you so much for that. So I'm just going to open this up to all of you. Any of you can answer. So we know that change in policy and practice can be very slow at times. It takes a long time to get to things. So can you tell us what motivates you to persevere in your involvement for informing and driving change? Chris, do you want to start off?
I've mentioned it a few times. I think what really does drive me is the fact that so many people who are carers are struggling, and we've got to basically help be the agents of change for them, because there is a real need out there. And as Farrah said, we've got the lived experience. We can see it from both sides. A little bit of me thinks that I've got to look at the future for my son, and we've got to be able to make the world as accepting of him and his differences as possible. So you do have a sort of like this internal drive to do something to help your children as well, of course. And unfortunately, some of us, or not unfortunately, but some of us, their kids have more needs than others, and we've got to work harder to make a better world for them.
Yep.
I would say when we think about change, the change that we started at Piala as a group of carers and consumers that come together helped the system. So we've seen a great reward where we didn't have people living with mental illness that were in that revolving door and using up bed space and professionals' time. If there was some communication with carers or connected people to the individual, when they went home, there was a much more successful transition. And so, there was a story once that I'm sure that I can share of an individual that in 12 months triaged 6 times. So that's 6 times, which is really quite an expense to the mental health system of people entering hospital, having some time and stay, and then doing the transition out and then reconnecting with lots of different services that were supporting that young man. Now, when we done the successful transition program where we communicated greatly with his brother, the following year he only triaged twice. So that is a successful change that we can occur, and we would not have happened if we didn't use our voice to ensure that that process was put in place.
Is there anyone else who wants to comment on what motivates you to, I suppose, work in this space and to advocate in the way that you do around carer support? Sissy?
I think for me personally, it's also my context in terms of what I'm learning at university. So I have an interest in consulting, and in that interest, I've worked with government consultancies. So looking at how, like, advising governments on how to best either make change or improve service delivery. And I think by looking at it from kind of the other perspective of the service providers, it's informed me of how much can be done and how much can be improved. So I think using a lot of what I've learned and what I know can be possible, I really want to apply that to the causes that I'm really passionate about, being a carer.
Great. We also know that carers have a lot on their plate in juggling their caring and other responsibilities. Do you find it a challenge to work to drive change? And how do you manage to sort of balance this with the other things that you do?
I can't respond because I can't balance it.
Yeah.
Right. In my own experience, what drives me to keep going is quite empowering, being a victim in a way of circumstances. To me, I'm fighting for reverse, in a way, the situation that happened to a member of my family. So that is my drive that I have every day, It's a 24/7 commitment, but still I have the energy to keep going in order to get justice in a way, in my case.
Yeah, I'll mention that I often, people started calling me the bus lady because the more information that I gathered in my care role with my daughter, the more I had to share with other people. And I remember many occasions meeting people on the bus and going, oh, you know, but if you go here, this person can support you. So I guess that's what drove me to find out more, because then people were starting to ask me questions. Oh, what happens when this occurs? And I'll say, I'll find out for you. And so, yeah, I often met people on the bus, and a colleague of mine once said, is that another person that you met on a bus, Dianne? So, yeah, so it was about, and especially in the Aboriginal community, because as an Aboriginal person, people trusted me. And so sometimes I would have people knocking at my door at 10 o'clock at night. Oh, Dianne, can you help me? This is occurring. So, you know, like, so then you just grow as a community member supporting people. So juggling it actually made me manage it better. Does that make sense? Yeah, because the more people asked me, the more I asked, and the more I asked, the more I received.
One of the things that I'm a technology person. I write computer programs for the government, and I found technology helps a lot in being able to split your time. When I do my work with University of New South Wales, we always do the meetings over Zoom, which is like Skype. The other thing is that I'm thinking of my father's group for dads of kids with autism, and that's on Facebook. There's 500 members, and there was a real need in that community. And although it's not systemic change, it still is a change for these people's lives to have somewhere where they can talk about their problems openly. And we've got guys in Perth, we've got guys in northern Queensland, Tasmania, everywhere. And yet there's also some that are only a suburb apart from me, and I still haven't met them. So I really think that technology has helped a lot in being able to spread yourself thinly.
Yeah. And maybe just thinking about all of the things that you've all been involved in, what do you think is the greatest outcome that you've achieved from the work that you've done by informing policy from your carer experience? Yep, Georgie.
Probably my the work that I do. So when I was doing support coordination, and I was working in the refugee community as a caseworker, and now as a support worker with people with dementia and people with mental illness and disabilities, I am able to completely engage with them. I'm a bit like you as the bus lady in the workplace, and I've got to be really careful because I am constantly going outside of my job description, which I've been reined in for, but to be able to just completely engage with people. And I guess because of my experience, I'm quite fearless, and nothing freaks me out because of what I've been exposed to. Yeah. So I can completely go in there with most clients and be there for them, and I think that's good for them. Yeah, particularly with the older people who are caring for their loved ones with dementia. That's such a big issue because they're so removed from understanding what their rights are, and how important it is to look after themselves, partly because of the generation. Yeah. So, yeah.
Does anyone else want to comment on that in terms of the greatest outcome that they've achieved as a result of their care advocacy?
I think I've just been little incremental changes more than anything. I think my father's group that I created, I'm really quite proud of that. There's a lot of people who are in great need there, and I'm not talking about macho stuff. It's amazing that no one in the group is what you describe as macho, and they talk from the heart, a lot of them, and it's something that I feel I read it quite often, the conversations that go on, and I really am quite touched and quite humbled by the insight of some of the people. And in that environment, that's the only place that they can talk about their fears for their child, fears for their family, their joys, you know, where if you sort of like said, oh, you know, my 6-year-old child, you know, weed on the toilet today for the first time, and anywhere else everyone would say, so what? But within our community, it's really quite humbling to see conversations like that. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Does anyone else want to add anything to any of those questions? The final question that we were going to ask was, in what areas of policy and practice are you particularly interested in contributing to?
So I will say a whole gamut of things, because I look at a whole gamut of resources and information. But I'm really quite interested in, I had the pleasure of working on a project in the Nepean Blue Mountains, Hawkesbury region a few years ago, which really opened up my own knowledge and wealth of meeting very vulnerable people. And often some of the most vulnerable people become quite homeless. And they're homeless because of as a result that family members don't have the right resources or training on how to care for them. And so it causes family breakdowns. And so this is an area that, you know, if I don't gamble, but if I was to win $1 million or more, I think I would open up a place where very vulnerable people can come and be who they are as an individual, but still be in a very safe place. So I'm really interested in the homelessness, and I met some incredible people living on the riverbanks, sleeping in libraries during the day because that was where they felt safe, but had a whole, you know, hadn't taken any medication for 2 years, and the medication actually could maintain their health and well-being. You know, like, so all these little things are intricacies of what I would like to drive for change, and we need to find them first.
I'm going to be completely selfish and put employment kind of as a priority, because, you know, that's been really important for me and my identity, and I'm in a single parent household and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's been a very challenging journey, and it's something that's really important for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. And the other thing is, I remember Gabrielle really articulately talked about the fear of contamination, and under the sort of umbrella of community awareness, and I've experienced this a lot with family and friends, people just going like this, you know, and you just slowly get more and more distance from people who just don't have that, you know, courage or whatever, for want of a better word. But when she said fear of contamination, that really kind of struck a chord for me. I don't know how that can happen. I think one area that I think is important is to build capacity amongst carers to be able to articulate better, to not whinge and to not dump stuff and try not to be negative, and to be able to talk in a way that's clear and concise, to be able to give the message across so that people can understand what they're experiencing a bit better.
I think I'd like to be involved in a more inclusive world for people with disabilities, because I think there's so many opportunities that are present for all of us and that are just not there for the people who we care for, and that's just not fair. So I feel they've been disadvantaged. And the other thing is, as my son's growing older, he's going to hopefully enter the workplace one day, and I think there aren't that many opportunities present as well once they transition from high school. Quite often they have a lot of capabilities, hidden talents that are overlooked, and people judge them. You can't judge a book by its cover, so there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. So I feel there needs to be tailor-made programs for them to keep their unique talents in mind, and not just try and put them into a box and say you have to fit in, because it's not about fitting in. It's about and they're outstanding in a lot of things. So I think to judge them and to try and mold them into what society thinks is acceptable is not correct. They have so much to offer, and we need to make this world more inclusive, and we need to provide those opportunities for them, and we need to make all those things available for them. There's so much that needs to be done. So we definitely need tailor-made programs. We need more transition to work. We need to work on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. We need to move forward, and we need to be more inclusive. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we might move to take whether there's any questions from the floor to any of the carers up here today.
Oh, hi. My name is Karen. I'm a mum and a registered nurse. I have my own I have a company that's now providing care to the community for the elderly and people with disability. My son is now 21. He was actually, and I'm speaking to the last lady there that spoke, he was on Employable Me, this last series. His name's Eric. And me as a carer and a mum, that the process of going from the transition from high school to employment, and he had, if anyone saw the show, he has a lot of talents, but were very much overlooked. And me as a mum didn't want to go down that track of being on national television to millions of people, but we did it, and it was an experience. But at the end of the day, Eric was able to gain meaningful employment and works for a government department in the hospital. And so now I have seen a significant difference. It's just a shame, though, that it took that amount of effort and for us to be as exposed as we were on national television for him to actually gain that employment, because I think if we didn't do that, he would not have that job. So, yeah.
Thanks for that comment. Yep.
Sorry, it's me again. I did appreciate your comment about navigating the NDIS and how much time that has taken up. And I really, that is something that when I go out to see people, the carers are so distraught trying to navigate. And I think, you know, on top of the caring role is also managing that system. And I just want any more comments about that you think that we can make that better for you.
Well, I think I've kind of mastered it now. I think in a second.
Can you write a handbook then?
Second year or third year. Yeah, I mean, it's a constant changing space. You know, I think they've just changed some of their policies in the latest price guide. One thing I did sort of want to advocate for, which is connected, is where have all the case managers gone? You know, so in the ADIC days, I'd have a case manager who was my go-to for everything, and they don't seem to exist anymore. So I'd love to try and, I'm not sure where that fits between the NDIS and the ICSS, and I did want to ask them, are they going to create these roles, the case management roles within the ICSS? I doubt it, but...
No, I don't think there's specifically caseworker roles in the ICSS, but I think there's capacity for peer support and peer workers, and I still think there is value in that one key worker kind of context. So whether it's called a caseworker, whether it's a key worker, and I think I might have commented on that somewhere this morning, but I think a lot of the research, particularly for young carers, but also for carers generally, is that if you've got that point of contact and that one person to help navigate the system with you and for you, then that makes a difference. So I think we would certainly be trying to look at that in our delivery of that through the region that we're successful in.
And one thing that I've found really helpful with the NDIS is finding allied health workers, which we have a team of people, there are some that are quite NDIS friendly and they almost take on that key worker role. Like when we were under ADDIC, the physio was the key worker, and that's the way ADDIC organised it. The allied health worker who was spending most of the time with your child became the key worker. So that system doesn't exist anymore, but if you can find an allied health professional who's regular, who's really onto it, you know, who's one step ahead of you, then that just makes, you know, your life a lot easier. Yeah.
I've had to get government and tell them about situations that then the family have actually had to go to the government and tell them about the situation.
Yeah.
I'm a physio, but my role wasn't enough. It had to come from that family. But the power of you passing on those stories to the right people
Creates change. Yep. Yep. Any? Yep. Yeah. Yep.
I just wanted to say congratulations. I remember sitting about 1978 at the first Mental Health Carers Forum and hearing very similar stories, but the difference was, I think, that I haven't heard in any of you that you have had token roles, which is up until now I think has often been the case. We tick the box and we have carers representatives that really haven't been listened to, but you lot sound like you won't not be listened to. And and I'm really glad about that, because often what happens is that the roles that people play, it was great to hear you, Chris, talk about people, particularly in their economic situation, because they don't have the voice to stand up. They don't have the economy to stand up. They don't have they don't love their children any less than we do. But we certainly, as middle class people, we tend to forget that while we're knocking on the glass ceiling, there's people drowning in the basement. And I'm really proud to. I'd like to say I'm really proud of all of you, and I applaud you absolutely.
Hello, good afternoon. So impressive story. My name is Jesura from Multicultural Care. So currently I run the program for peer-to-peer support the carers. So I often face the carer all the day. So here's a different story, some good story, a bad story, just really attacked me. So today is also very impressive. My question was just ask about, obviously you have a few from cold cultural background carers as you. So what kind of most challenging things for you as a carers from cold cultural background?
The challenge will be to access the services. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I just would like to know.
The reason why will be the lack of the language. Absolutely isolated in their own communities, and not knowing what is up there for them to access, what services. And we see many pamphlets probably in hospital or some other places where people can have that in their own language. But I think that has to be, they have to add the other way of information, which will be perhaps on television or radio, where people who are at home are able to reach out. That's my own idea.
Yeah, thank you. So it's, actually I always heard the same thing. So just language barriers is a really big stop for the people from cultural backgrounds. That is why I run the program, why I collect some evidence to report the government, let them to know how we can better support the cultural carers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we need that.
Can I add
Thank
something?
Yeah.
Because I've worked with people from refugee backgrounds, And a lot of the countries they've come from, there are no services. So they are not used to, much more than people who've been raised in Australia, they don't even know that there are those services out there. And they also are not aware of their rights, which is a huge issue. Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, another question over here. And that might be our last one before we finish this session. Thanks, Lisa.
Great job, guys. I come from the Southern Highlands. My name's Deb West. I am a client of Anglicare, which I'm so proud of. They're very passionate in what they do. They're just incredible. Dianne, where you said the bus, I still think it's important for the carers gathering because the information, communication is just so powerful, and we also cater for Aboriginal people out our way. Also, language barriers. We have a whole range of covering everything for whatever, different cultures. Sorry. But I care for my nan, who's 98. I care for my husband, who's 65. And I care for my son, who's 25. My husband's Aboriginal. He has quite a lot of health issues. But if it wasn't for Anglicare, I don't know where I'd be. They are my saviour. And with the different groups that are operating, and when they say the carers are getting together, it's not about downloading, it's about, wow, we're all meeting. It's a bit of a break. We don't even discuss our caring role because we're actually having that little time out. So to take that away, that's really not good for me because I'm quite isolated out the Southern Highlands. So that's all I had to say. Good on all the carers.
Thank you for your response. And you're right, when something's working, treasure it.
It's working beautifully.
That's really important for all of us not to isolate ourselves as individuals, because when we isolate ourselves, life becomes different and it doesn't become any better for the people that we love and care for. You know, like my daughter's life would have been very, very different if I sat at home hiding her. I didn't. I was knocking on everyone's door looking for services, and it's really important that we celebrate and enjoy that time that we share together because that can make us strong and then that makes our job better.
We have a lot of people that have come on board from the Aboriginal community and, well, as you know, when we're isolated, then the depression, it's just creating more problems for the carer and the person you're caring for. But no, Anglicare was our saviour, and I would be really sad to see what we've achieved, what they've built, what to be integrated again, something different. It's just about educating ourselves, all these different changes. It's just, I don't have time. Like, I'm really surprised I'm here today. Getting up at 4:30 to get here today to be on time. But in saying that, like, we don't have the time to have all these changes. We're so looked after now. What we find works for us, we don't want to lose. So I'm hearing you, Dianne.
So your family Barton, your husband Barton?
No.
I got mob in the Southern Highlands that are related, that's all.
No. My husband and his family are originally from Peak Hill. But
I'm from Murray River.
Right. And Anglicare, even though they have a big multicultural, I think it's great because every time we have a meeting, I'm English. Someone will stand up and say, I'm Mauritius. And we always announce our culture first. And it's everyone teaching everybody. And it's beautiful. It's great.
That's what mob does when we come together.
That's it. Yep. That's it.
I think that's a great note to finish on. Hopefully that's given you some insight into the importance of the carer voice in informing policy and practice. Can you please thank our carers, Catalina, Chris, Farrah, Sissy, Georgie and Dianne. Thank you so much for sharing your information and insight. We really appreciate it.